Welcome back to Proxima, everybody, and today we're going to be comparing two people, one person who actually existed in history and one person who lives only in our hearts. And of course, I'm talking about Hannibal Barca of Carthage, who is an actual person living in history, and Eldrad Ulthran of Uthway, somebody who is a fictitious character and is known to be, well, to be honest, a bit of a douchebag. But I thought that it would be a cool thing to compare these guys and talk a little bit about some of the historical influences that the creators of this game were inspired by. And I believe that Eldrad Ulthran was probably either directly or maybe even indirectly inspired by the actions and the personality of Hannibal Barca of Carthage. So let's go ahead and get right into the story of who Hannibal is and why he's important. So what we're going to be doing in this video today, again, is we're going to be looking at who Hannibal Barca was and what he achieved, and we're also going to be looking at the similarities between Hannibal and Eldrad and the inspiration, of course, behind our most beloved Farseer. Okay, so if we go back about 2,000 years from now, about 2,200 years from now, and we locate ourselves in the Mediterranean, in Italy, we would find that the Roman Empire was coming into a place of prominence in the Mediterranean. However, in North Africa, another powerful empire had previously existed. And of course, I'm talking about Carthage. So in this map here, the light purple is the territory owned by Carthage, one of the most powerful empires in the Mediterranean Sea at the time. And in the red, in Italy, we have the Roman Empire, which was just starting out. It was still a republic, and it wasn't super strong, but it was getting there. And it was starting to challenge the power and the might of Carthage. And for the first time in a long time, the Carthaginians had met a rival in the Romans that they could not defeat in battle or ignore 100% of the time. They were in close contact, they were fighting over the same trade routes, and that just could not stand. War was going to be inevitable between these two mighty kingdoms, or should I say empires. And during this period of time, there came a man out of the royal family of Carthage, the Barca family, named Hannibal, whose hate for the Romans really knew no bounds as he grew up during a period of time in which the Carthaginians and the Romans were in frequent conflict with each other, and he saw the Romans as nothing more than greedy expansionists who wanted nothing more than the destruction of his home. And coming from a military family, he had a lot of background military knowledge and was considered the premier general or strategist of the Carthaginian Empire. And as such, he was entrusted with a lot of the Carthaginians' military forces in the Punic Wars, which were the wars that the Carthaginians fought against the Romans. So after the First Punic War really ended in kind of a defeat for Carthage, basically Rome had established itself permanently in the Mediterranean, and through a series of treaties after the First Punic War, Carthage no longer had total control over the seas in that area. However, this came to be kind of a stale point for most Carthaginians as their wealth that they had gotten from trade was severely reduced. And of course, frequent contact rubbed the Carthaginians the wrong way because they had enjoyed for a long time an open trading atmosphere in the Mediterranean, and they no longer had that. They now had to share their space with the Romans. So, after a while, despite the treaties that were signed during the First Punic War, the inevitable Second Punic War started, and Hannibal was ready for it. However, he knew that he couldn't just assault Italy directly. He knew that he had to kind of create a different path in which to assault the Romans from an unexpected direction, a place where they would not know where he was coming from. So what he decided to do was he decided to take his army, including several elephants, and cross the Alps, which, of course, I'm talking about the Swiss Alps, right? And during this journey, Hannibal actually lost a vast amount of his army doing this, and of the 32 or so, I believe, elephants that he brought over with him, only one had survived. However, despite these terrible losses in the crossing of the Alps, Hannibal led an extremely fierce campaign against the Romans during the Second Punic War, in which his tactics allowed his small, irregular, and exhausted army to get the better of a much better equipped and trained Roman force. In one hilarious example, Hannibal actually attached torches to donkeys and bulls to trick the Romans into thinking that his army was actually much bigger than it was, and he started marching in the dead of night, so the Romans actually hesitated in attacking him, and because of that, Hannibal was able to escape with his army unscathed and thus remain unsurrounded. In addition to this, Hannibal led a series of lightning raids and ambushes against the Roman forces, which continuously bled their patience and made them very frustrated. So eventually, the Roman leadership in the Senate got tired of waiting for the Roman generals commanding the legions to get into groups with Hannibal and fight him. The Roman generals at that time were very cautious. They knew what Hannibal was up to, and as such, they didn't want to fall into his trap because they knew that if they did, their better trained soldiers and numbers would mean nothing in an ambush situation. So they decided to slowly plod forward and corner Hannibal off, and this campaign basically just took too long for the Romans back home, who wanted a quick end to the war. So what the Senate decided to do was replace the cautious, more, in my mind, intelligent military commanders that were commanding the Roman army, and replace them with a more bold and brash set of generals who had a lot of political ambition. And this did not go well. So the small and frequent skirmishes that the Carthaginians launched on the Romans made the leadership very impatient and rash. So these new military commanders decided that they would launch an assault on Hannibal directly, right away, regardless of any kind of traps that Hannibal might have had set up for them. Hannibal was well aware of this change in leadership and decided to use this as a perfect opportunity to catch the Romans in possibly the biggest trap of the time, and certainly one of the biggest in history. And of course, for those of you who know a little bit about history, I'm talking about the Battle of Cannae. Essentially, what happened in this battle was Hannibal lured the Roman army in with a portion of his lightly armed forces, and once the fighting started and the Romans were fully engaged, Hannibal used his reserves, which were hidden, to crush the Romans on three sides and eventually surround them. And it was a bloodbath. The Romans had no place to escape to, and all their training and equipment meant nothing when they were pressed so close together that many Romans never even felt a sword or a spear pass through their armor, but were slowly suffocated by their own men, slowly suffocated by those they had trained with for years and years of service. At the end of the day, once the slaughter was done, a vast majority of the Roman army lay dead or captured and was essentially totally destroyed. The army could not stand on its own anymore and was effectively defeated for good. And this caused a lot of panic within Rome. Once the Romans found out that this had happened, they were basically shocked, stunned, and a lot of them fled Rome for their very lives. At least the more wealthy did. However, luckily for the Romans, they had a couple of armies in reserve that they could bring up to defend the peninsula, and Rome itself, of course. And Hannibal, despite all of his military genius and tactics, did not have the force required to actually assault the city successfully. Again, like I said before, 31 of the 32 or so elephants in his army actually perished before he could even get there, so he had really no good way of assaulting Rome itself. And knowing this, and knowing that he basically had a long campaign of hit and run and raids ahead of him, the leadership back in Carthage decided to recall Hannibal because they wanted to prepare for the inevitable counterassault of the Romans when they did come. And eventually, Come they did. The Romans under Scipio Africanus came for the Carthaginians, and in a series of battles on the tip of North Africa, were able to defeat the Carthaginians at the Battle of Zama and force them to sign a treaty of surrender in which the Carthaginian Empire would never truly recover. So, that's a little bit about Hannibal Barca and his successes and failures in life. However, how is he similar to Eldrad Ulthran? And I think actually they have a lot of similarities if you really look at who they are as people and what they aim to achieve. Both Hannibal and Eldrad were master tacticians who were able to misdirect their opponents. Both had a deep hate towards their own great enemy and made many personal sacrifices to see them defeated. Eldrad hates chaos, and of course, Hannibal hates the Romans, both of whom they see as being aggressive and destructive. Both also had disagreements with high-ranking members of their own faction. Hannibal himself had many arguments with his own brother and his own father about the way in which the war should be waged. Of course, Hannibal was the more aggressive of the three, whereas the previous two were more conservative and cautious. And, lastly, both were part of an empire whose sun was setting and tried desperately to cling on to the golden rays of light before all went dark. So, in their similarities, Hannibal and Eldrad were both master tacticians, and they were able to misdirect their opponents to a great degree. Hannibal was able to deceive the Romans many times, especially with his donkey and bull tactic, in which allowed him to escape with his army unscathed when he was surrounded. And Eldrad performed perhaps the greatest deception of all when he misdirected the orcs under Ghazghul towards the imperial world of Armageddon. And if you guys know anything about the fluff here, basically Eldrad misdirected the orcs in basically tricking them into going a different direction, which led them to the imperial world of Armageddon, in which there was a massive battle that killed millions of humans. And of course, the most important character out of that conflict is probably Commissar Yarrick from the Imperial Guard. However, this was basically to save the nearby Craftworld, which probably would have been destroyed and 10,000 Eldar lives lost. And this was basically just so the Eldar could escape, and as such, Eldrad led his people to safety. So this was a way in which I see a lot of clear elements of similarity between Hannibal and Eldrad. Hannibal trying to use misdirection to save his army in a dire situation, and Eldrad using the same thing to save his people from another dire situation. Both of them also had a deep hate towards their own great enemy and made many personal sacrifices to see them defeated. For example, Hannibal himself dedicated his life to fighting the Romans, while Eldrad has a deep desire to destroy chaos before it engulfs the world. And this is a view shared by Hannibal about the Romans themselves, who he believed were nothing more than hungry expansionists bent on destruction. And of course, in some of the old lore, Eldrad perhaps made the greatest sacrifice of all by putting his soul on the line against a demonic chaos fortress. And if any of you have ever read the old fluff and some of the old codexes, basically what Eldrad did is he pitted his soul against the soul of a demonic fortress. He poured as much of his own essence into many spirit stones as he could before he went to battle with the great demon. And when he went to battle with this great demon, a lot of his soul stones, the spirit stones, disappeared or dulled. Only a few of them remained lifeless, and only a couple of his closest advisors and closest comrades believed that he was possibly still alive, fighting for his life within the demonic fortress. In addition, both of them had disagreements with high-ranking members of their own faction. Hannibal, throughout his campaign in the Second Punic War, had many disagreements with the leaders of Carthage on how the war should progress and how much resources he would need. Again, Hannibal was somebody who really wanted the Romans destroyed and wanted as much resources as possible to do so. However, the leadership back home was more cautious, and they said, Hannibal, if we give you this much, we won't have anything left to defend ourselves. So, because of that, Hannibal was not able to achieve the ultimate victory that he sought in Italy. Eldrad, on the other hand, supported the rise of the Ynnari. even though some Eldar find their ways blasphemous, including those within the High Seer Council of Uthway itself. So, both of them had severe disagreements in some cases and about, I should say, the ways in which to achieve ultimate victory over their enemies. And lastly, both were part of an empire whose sun was setting and tried desperately to cling onto the golden rays of light before all went dark. Carthage had been in decline after the First Punic War against the Romans and had never truly recovered from it. The Eldar race are a race in decline and almost on the verge of extinction after the fall of their great civilization to Slaanesh. And both Eldrad and Hannibal seek to restore their once great empires and ensure their survival. As both of these people, or characters, Eldar, Azerani, human, care deeply for their people and want nothing more but their survival and their future. So, in conclusion, I think Eldrad and Hannibal Barca have way too many similarities with each other to be a mere coincidence on the writer's part. I think both symbolize the struggle of a once great power falling prey to an emerging threat, one that threatens to engulf all they once knew in darkness. And in the case of Carthage, that darkness certainly came in the end. In the Third Punic War, when the Romans finally decided to put an end to Carthage once and for all, and destroy their city of Carthage, burn it to the ground, and sow the very fields with salt, so that nothing could ever grow there again. Much like what chaos does to worlds that they destroy. If any of you have ever read any of the Gaunt's Ghosts books, I recommend them if you are into that kind of thing. What chaos do when they come to the world is they basically strip it of its natural resources and then prevent it from basically anything else ever growing there again with the touch of chaos. So very similar to what the Romans did to Carthage. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. That was kind of a brief history. I didn't get to touch on all of this stuff, obviously, but if you guys have any additional comments or anything like that, you guys like history or know anything about Hannibal or have any corrections, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know them. I really love history. It's something that I studied in school and still love to this day. So let me know if you guys have any more information on this stuff. I'd love to know it. And if you guys are interested in more history type videos, I can definitely do those as well. This has been kind of something I wanted to do for a while. So anyway, so thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time. If you have any other suggestions on any other videos, let me know. All right, have a good one, everybody, and peace out.